The USS Earth received an SOS from beyond the galaxy. What it found started a war. The USS Earth was the largest ship humanity had ever built. It was 3 kilometers long, shaped like a spear, and covered in dark plating that soaked up starlight instead of reflecting it. Humans had only joined the wider galactic community 20 years earlier, after the Galactic Concorde found Earth's old radio signals drifting through space. Since then, humans had been treated like children by the older species. They were given small trade routes, minor outposts, and polite smiles that hid quiet doubt. The USS Earth was supposed to change that. It was humanity's first true deep space explorer, built to prove that humans could stand among the stars as equals. Captain Marcus Webb stood on the bridge with his hands behind his back, watching the stars slide past the front window. He was 50 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many long nights. He had fought in the small border skirmishes that came after first contact, when pirates tested the new arrivals to see how weak they were. He was not a man who scared easily, but even he felt a chill when the alert came through. "Captain, we have a signal," said Commander Aisha Okafor, the ship's first officer. She was younger than Webb, sharp-eyed, and always the first to notice when something was wrong. She had grown up on a colony ship and had never seen Earth with her own eyes, but she loved it, the way people love a story they were told as a child. "What kind of signal?" Webb asked. "An SOS, old format, but readable. Distress code, repeated over and over." Aisha's fingers moved fast across her console. "Captain, the location doesn't make sense." "Explain." "It's not coming from inside the galaxy. The source is outside the galactic disk entirely. It's coming from the space between galaxies." The bridge went quiet. Even the soft hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade into the silence. Nobody spoke for a moment because nobody knew what to say. No ship, no species, no empire that humans had ever heard of had built anything capable of reaching the space between galaxies, let alone sending a distress call from it. Dr. Ren Tanaka, the ship's chief science officer, walked quickly to the front of the bridge. She was small and quick, with dark hair pulled back and glasses that she pushed up her nose, out of habit rather than need. She had spent her whole career studying signals from deep space, and she had never seen anything like this.
"Captain, I need to see this,"
she said. Webb nodded and gestured to the main screen. Aisha pulled up the data. Lines of light moved across the display, showing the shape of the signal. It repeated in a strange rhythm. 3 short pulses, then 3 long ones, then 3 short again. It was old. It was the same pattern humans had used for their own SOS signal a century earlier, before space travel, back when ships at sea used radio to call for help. "That can't be a coincidence," Tanaka said quietly. "Someone out there is using our old distress code." "Or something that looks like it," said a new voice. Everyone turned. Standing near the door was Kestra, a tall, thin being with pale blue skin and large black eyes, wrapped in the silver robes of a Galactic Concorde observer. Kestra had been assigned to the USS Earth as a liaison, a polite way of saying, a watcher. The Concorde did not fully trust humans yet, and every human ship that traveled beyond known space carried an observer from an older species. Kestra was from the Vashtan people, a race that had been part of the Concorde for over 4,000 years. "What do you mean?" Webb asked. "I mean that the shape of a distress call is not proof of who sent it," Kestra said. Their voice was calm, almost musical, but there was an edge of worry in it that Webb had not heard before. "In 4,000 years, the Concorde has never detected a signal from outside our galaxy. Not once. If something out there is signaling us, it means one of 2 things. Either an enormous ship traveled here from another galaxy, which would take longer than the recorded history of every species in the Concorde combined, unless it had technology far beyond our own. Or something is already here, closer than we think, and using an old trick to get our attention." The bridge felt colder after Kestra spoke. Webb looked at Tanaka. "Can you trace the exact source?" "I can try," Tanaka said. She worked for several minutes, her fingers dancing over the console, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Finally she looked up. "Captain, the signal isn't coming from outside the galaxy at all. It's being bounced. Something out past the galactic rim is using old, damaged relay stations to send the signal, in a way that makes it look like it's coming from much farther away than it really is. The real source." The real source is at the very edge of our galaxy, in the outer dark, past the last starlit systems, in a region the old star charts call the Silent Reach. Why would anyone bounce a signal like that? Aisha asked. Why make it look farther away instead of closer? I don't know, Tanaka admitted. Maybe to hide the true location from anyone tracking it. Maybe it's a mistake in old equipment. Maybe it's a trap. Webb rubbed his jaw. He had learned, in his years of command, that when something looked like a trap, it was worth being careful, but it was rarely worth turning away. Humans had a saying that had followed them into space. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. It was a saying that made the older species uneasy, because humans seemed to mean it more than most. Do we know anything about the Silent Reach? He asked. Kestra answered. It is called the Silent Reach because ships that go there do not come back, and signals from it are never received. It has been marked as forbidden by the Concord for over 2,000 years. No one knows exactly why. The records say only that ancient scouts went there and were never heard from again, and that later expeditions found nothing but empty space and cold stars. Eventually, the Concord decided it was not worth the loss of life to keep investigating, and the region was marked off limits. Even pirates and smugglers avoid it. That's a strange kind of legend, Aisha said. Empty space that swallows ships. Legends often hide truth wrapped in fear, Kestra said. I would advise against going there, Captain. Strongly. Webb looked around the bridge. His crew was watching him, waiting. He thought about the 20 years since first contact, the small ways humans had been kept at arm's length, given the boring assignments, the safe routes, the missions no one else wanted. He thought about the reason the USS Earth had been built in the first place, to go where other ships would not, and to prove that humanity could handle what it found. There's someone out there sending a call for help, Webb said. Real or fake, bounced or not, if there's a chance that someone is alive and in danger, we're not going to ignore it because of an old ghost story. Kestra's black eyes studied him for a long moment. I expected you to say that. I will note my objection in my report, Captain, but I will not stop you. I am only here to observe. Noted, Webb said, and for the first time that hour, he almost smiled. He turned to Aisha. Set a course for the Silent Reach. Best speed. I want full scans running the entire way, and I want defense systems on standby, not active, but ready. We don't know what's out there. Let's not walk in with our weapons drawn, but let's not walk in blind either. Aye, Captain, Aisha said, and began entering the course. The USS Earth turned slowly in space, its massive engines glowing a soft blue as it changed direction. Behind it, the familiar lights of charted space, the safe trade lanes and known star systems, began to fall away. Ahead of it lay only darkness, an area of the galaxy where the stars grew fewer and dimmer, spreading farther and farther apart, until at last there was nothing but empty black, dotted with the faint light of dying suns. It took 3 days to reach the edge of the Silent Reach. During that time, Tanaka worked almost without sleep, studying every scrap of data the ship's sensors could gather. She found strange things. Old debris fields, the remains of ships that did not match any known design in the Concorde's records. Radiation signatures that suggested weapons far more powerful than anything humans had encountered, and scattered here and there, faint traces of an energy signature that repeated across many different systems, always the same pattern, as if something had passed through the region again and again, over a very long time. It's like a trail, she told Webb on the second day, showing him the map she had built. Something moved through here, system by system, over and over. Whatever it was, it left the same mark everywhere it went. A trail of what? Tanaka hesitated. I think it's a trail of what's missing. Look at these systems. Each one shows old signs of life, cities, power grids, ships. But there's nothing there now. No people, no wreckage from a war, no signs of disease or disaster. Just empty. Like everyone packed up and left in a hurry, or like everyone was taken. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy looks. Webb felt the same chill he had felt when the signal first came in. Keep studying it, he said. I want to know what we're walking into before we get there. On the third day, the USS Earth reached the outer edge of the Silent Reach. The stars here were few and far apart, old red giants and cold white dwarfs scattered across the black like dying embers. The ship's sensors, usually crowded with data from busy star systems, showed almost nothing. It was, Aisha said quietly, like flying into a graveyard. Then the sensors picked up something new. "Captain, I have a contact," said Ensign Priya Desai, the ship's sensor operator, a young woman who had graduated from the Fleet Academy only a year earlier. Her voice shook slightly. "It's small, damaged, drifting, not under power. I'm reading it as a vessel, but it doesn't match anything in our database." "Put it on screen," Webb said. The image appeared. It was a small ship, no bigger than a shuttle, its hull cracked and scorched black in several places. It tumbled slowly end over end, dead in space, with no lights and no visible power, and it was the source of the SOS. "Life signs?" Webb asked. Desai worked for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Yes, sir. Faint. But there. Something is alive in there." Webb felt the weight of the decision settle on him. He looked at Kestra, who said nothing, only watched with those large black eyes. He looked at Tanaka, who nodded, urging him forward. He looked at Aisha, who was already moving to prepare a response team. "Bring us in close," Webb said. "Launch a rescue shuttle. I want a security team with them, and I want Dr. Tanaka on the shuttle too, in case whoever is in there needs medical attention we don't understand. Move fast, but move careful." The order went out, and within minutes, a small shuttle detached from the USS Earth and drifted toward the broken ship. Inside the shuttle, Tanaka sat beside two armed security officers, her scanner in her lap, her heart beating fast. She had trained for years to make first contact with new species, but nothing had prepared her for the strange stillness of the silent reach, or for the feeling that something out here was watching them. The shuttle docked with the broken ship carefully, using a magnetic clamp since the airlocks did not match. The security team cut through the outer hull with a plasma torch, working slowly to avoid damaging whatever was inside. When the hole was wide enough, they pushed through into the darkness beyond. The inside of the ship was cold and cramped, lit only by the dim glow of a single dying light strip. Wires hung loose from the ceiling, the air smelled burnt, and there, strapped into a chair in the center of the small cabin, was a figure unlike anything Tanaka had ever seen. It was small, no taller than a human child, with gray skin that looked almost like stone, and long thin arms that ended in delicate fingers. Its head was large compared to its body, with two enormous eyes, now closed, and a small mouth that moved weakly, whispering something in a language none of them understood. Around its wrist was a strange metal band that pulsed faintly with a soft red light. "It's alive," Tanaka whispered, moving forward with her scanner. "Barely. It needs help right now." The security officers helped her free the creature from its restraints, careful not to hurt it further. As they lifted it gently, its eyes opened for just a moment, huge and dark and full of pain and fear. It looked at Tanaka's face, at her human features so strange and unfamiliar, and instead of terror, something like relief passed over its expression. It whispered one more word before its eyes closed again, a word that the ship's translator, working quickly, managed to catch and process just enough to give a rough meaning. The word was help. They carried the creature back to the shuttle as gently as they could, and within minutes, they were racing back toward the USS Earth, toward the medical bay, toward whatever answers this small dying stranger could give them. But even as the shuttle sped through the black, silent space of the silent reach, Tanaka could not shake the feeling that they were not alone out here. Somewhere in this graveyard of dead stars, something else was watching, something that had left the same terrible mark on system after system, something that had reduced this poor creature's ship to a broken, drifting wreck. And whatever it was still out there. Back on the USS Earth, Captain Webb watched the shuttle return on the main screen, his jaw tight with worry. Beside him, Kestra spoke softly, almost to themselves. "I have read every record the Concord has about this region, Captain. There has never been a survivor, not once, in 2,000 years." Kestra turned to look at him, their black eyes wide with something that might have been fear, or might have been awe. "Whatever you have found today, it has never happened before. I do not know if that is good news or very, very bad news." Webb said nothing. He simply watched the shuttle dock and waited to learn the truth. The medical bay of the USS Earth was bright and clean, a sharp contrast to the cold darkness of the wrecked ship. Doctors moved quickly around the small gray-skinned creature, hooking up monitors, running scans, trying to understand a body that matched nothing in their medical records. Tanaka stood at the edge of the room, watching, her scanner data already being shared with every science station on the ship. "Heart rate stabilizing," said the chief medical officer, a calm older man named Dr. Owusu. "Whatever species this is, its biology is closer to ours than I expected. Carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, though the oxygen mix it needs is a little different from ours. We've adjusted the air in this section to match as best we can guess." "Will it live?" Webb asked, arriving at the doorway. "I think so. It was dehydrated, exhausted, and suffering from exposure to cold and low pressure, but nothing looks permanently damaged. Given time, I believe it will recover." Owusu glanced at the metal band still on the creature's wrist. "This device is interesting. It's giving off a small amount of power, and I believe it was helping keep the creature alive during the ship's failure. It might be some kind of survival technology, or maybe even a translator." Kestra stepped closer, studying the band with obvious curiosity. "May I examine it, once the patient is stable? I do not recognize the technology, and in 4,000 years, that is rare." "Once it's stable," Owusu agreed. It took almost 6 hours before the creature's condition improved enough for it to wake. When its large dark eyes finally opened again, they moved quickly around the room, taking in the strange faces, the bright lights, the unfamiliar shapes of human technology. Its small body tensed, and for a moment Tanaka feared it would panic, but then its gaze settled on her face, the same face it had seen in the wreck, and some of the tension eased. "You are safe," Tanaka said slowly, gesturing gently with open hands, a gesture she hoped would translate across species as calm and non-threatening. "We are not going to hurt you." The ship's translator, still working to build a proper language model from the small amount of speech it had recorded, produced a rough, halting voice in response, piecing together words from the creature's own language. "Where am I?" the translated voice said, choppy, but understandable. "You're aboard a human ship, the USS Earth," Webb said, stepping forward carefully. "We heard your signal. We came to help." The creature's eyes widened. It tried to sit up, wincing with the effort, and Owusu gently pressed it back down onto the bed. "Human," the creature repeated, testing the word. "I have heard this word. In old records. I did not believe anyone would come." "What's your name?" Tanaka asked gently. "Where are you from?" The creature was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength, or perhaps gathering courage. "I am called Ith. My people are the Ithel. Our home was 3 systems from here." Its small mouth trembled. "It is gone now. Taken. Like all the others." "Taken by what?" Webb asked, his voice steady but urgent. Ith's dark eyes filled with something that looked painfully like grief. "We do not have a true name for it. My people called it the hollowing, because that is what it leaves behind. Worlds, hollow, empty. It has been happening for longer than my people have written history. Every few generations, ships come. Not many. Only a few. But they are enough. They take what they want, and they leave nothing behind." "Take what?" Tanaka asked. "People," Ith said simply, and the word hung heavy in the sterile air of the medical bay. "They take people. We do not know why. No one has ever seen them do it, and lived to tell what they saw. We only know that a world visited by the hollowing is a world that goes silent within a single turn of its moon. My own ship was fleeing when it happened. I saw the light from my homeworld go out from orbit, all the cities, one after another, like candles being pinched between fingers. I ran. I sent the old call for help, the one from a book of ancient signals my grandmother's grandmother kept, hoping something might still be listening this far out from the heart of things. I did not think anyone would come." The room was silent. Even Kestra, who had lived 4,000 years and heard countless stories of tragedy across the galaxy, looked shaken. "How long ago did this happen?" Webb asked quietly. 6 days, Ith whispered. "My ship's engines failed 2 days after I escaped. I have been drifting since, waiting to die, hoping the signal reached someone before my air ran out." Webb felt something harden in his chest, a mix of anger and resolve that he had felt only a few times in his life. He looked at Tanaka, then at Kestra, then back at the small, frightened, grieving creature on the medical bed. "You're safe now," he said again, and this time his voice carried a weight of promise. "And we're going to find out exactly what did this to your people." Kestra stepped closer, their expression grave. "Captain, I must remind you, the Concord marked this region forbidden for a reason. If this hollowing is real, and if it is as old and as powerful as this survivor describes, we are looking at something the Concord itself could not stop, 2,000 years ago. This is not a rescue mission anymore. This may be something far larger." Webb turned to look out the small viewport of the medical bay, out at the cold, dim stars of the silent reach, stars that had watched entire worlds go dark, over and over, for longer than any living species could remember. "Then it's time somebody finally stopped it," he said. Behind him, Ith watched the tall, strange human, with the steady eyes, and for the first time since the lights of home had gone out, allowed a small, fragile flicker of hope. Word of Ith's story spread through the USS Earth within hours. By the next morning, every officer on the ship knew about the hollowing, about worlds going dark, about a survivor who had watched her own homeworld's lights vanish one by one. The mood on the ship changed. Where before there had been curiosity and caution, now there was a quiet, simmering anger, the kind that spreads through a crew when they learn that innocent people have been hurt, and no one has ever answered for it. Captain Webb called a meeting in the briefing room just off the bridge. Around the table sat Commander Aisha Okafor, Dr. Ren Tanaka, Chief Engineer Diego Alvarez, and Kestra, the Vashtan observer. Ith sat in a chair built to human proportions but padded to fit smaller bodies, still weak but stronger than the day before, wrapped in a warm blanket from the ship's stores. "Here's where we stand," Webb said, looking around the table. "We came out here to answer a distress call. We found a survivor of something that has apparently been happening for centuries, wiping out entire worlds without a trace. The Concord marked this region forbidden 2,000 years ago and never explained why. Now we know why. I want options." Alvarez, a broad-shouldered man with grease-stained hands even in a clean uniform, spoke first. "Ship's in good shape. Full power, weapons ready, engines at 100%. We can go deeper into the silent reach if you want, Captain. I don't love the idea, but we can do it." "The question isn't whether we can," Aisha said. "It's whether we should. We're one ship. If this hollowing really has been erasing worlds for centuries, and the entire Concord couldn't stop it 2,000 years ago, what makes us think one exploration ship can do anything but get erased too?" "She's right to be cautious," Kestra added. "I have already sent a report back to Concord Central, informing them of what we have found. I expect instructions soon. My strong recommendation, Captain, is that we withdraw to the edge of the reach and wait for a proper response fleet, rather than press forward alone." Webb considered this. He was not a reckless man, whatever his reputation among the older species might suggest. But he had also learned, in 20 years of dealing with the Concord, that wait for proper response often meant wait forever, especially when the people in danger were not important enough, powerful enough, or influential enough to matter to a council made up of 100 different species with 100 different priorities. "Ith," Webb said gently, turning to the small survivor, "I need to ask you something difficult. Do you know if there are other survivors, other worlds nearby that might still be in danger, or already attacked, where people might still be alive?" Ith's large eyes lowered. "There is another world, 3 systems past my own, the Doroth. They are old friends of my people, though we rarely spoke, since travel between our systems takes a long time even with our fastest ships. If the pattern of the hollowing is the same as it has always been, they may be next, or they may already be gone." The room fell silent. "That settles it for me," Webb said. "We go take a look. If they need help, we help. If we find more evidence about what's doing this, we gather it and bring it back to the Concord ourselves, so this stops being a rumor and a forbidden zone, and starts being something the whole galaxy has to deal with." Kestra sighed, a very human sound that Webb had noticed the Vashtan liaison had picked up during their assignment. "I cannot stop you, Captain. I can only remind you that caution has kept my people alive for 4,000 years. And it's let this hollowing wipe out world after world for just as long," Webb said, not unkindly. "Sometimes caution costs more than it saves." The USS Earth changed course, moving deeper into the silent reach, toward the world Ith had named. The journey took a day and a half. During that time, Tanaka worked closely with Ith, gently gathering more information, careful not to push the grieving survivor too hard. Slowly, a picture began to form. The Ithal had no advanced weapons, no strong defenses. They were a peaceful people who had once dreamed of joining the Concord themselves, sending messages outward for centuries in hopes that someone, somewhere, would hear them and welcome them in. No one ever had. We were too far out, Ith explained quietly, sitting in the ship's small garden module, one of the few places on the USS Earth that reminded her faintly of the plant life on her lost homeworld. Too small, too poor, too far from the trade lanes. The Concord ships never came this way. We had almost stopped hoping anyone ever would. "You're not alone anymore," Tanaka said. Ith looked at her with an expression humans were only beginning to learn to read on that small gray face, something between gratitude and disbelief. "I am beginning to understand why the humans are spoken of the way they are, in the small amount I have overheard from your officers. Impatient, reckless, kind in strange, sudden ways." She paused. "Where I come from, the ones who help strangers with nothing to gain are called by a very old word. It means, roughly, the ones who run toward fire." Tanaka smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. "We've been called worse." When the USS Earth arrived at the system of the Dorith, the crew found a world still intact, still glowing with the lights of cities, still alive. A wave of relief passed through the bridge, but relief did not last long. "Captain, I'm reading unusual activity at the edge of the system," Ensign Desai reported, her voice tense. "Multiple contacts, powered down, hiding just outside normal sensor range. If I hadn't been specifically looking for anything unusual, I would have missed them." "Show me," Webb said. The image resolved slowly on the main screen, a cluster of ships, sleek and black, shaped like curved blades, arranged in a loose formation, just beyond the system's outer planets. They were not doing anything, they were simply waiting. "Kestra, do you recognize that design?" Webb asked. Kestra stared at the screen for a long moment, and for the first time since Webb had met the Vashtan observer, he saw real fear cross their face. "No," Kestra said quietly. "I do not recognize it, and in 4,000 years of Concord records, I have never seen anything like it either. Captain, I believe we may be looking at the source of the hollowing itself." The bridge went very still. "They're not moving," Aisha said. "Not attacking, not communicating. Just sitting there. Waiting," Webb said grimly, "like a predator that hasn't decided if the prey is worth the trouble yet." Tanaka's fingers flew across her console, gathering every scrap of sensor data she could. "Captain, their power signatures are strange. I'm seeing very little active energy output, almost like the ships are asleep, but there's something else. A kind of low, steady pulse coming from the largest vessel in the group. It matches a rhythm. It's similar to a heartbeat." "A ship with a heartbeat," Alvarez muttered from the engineering station, half joking, half unsettled. "Contact the Dorith government," Webb ordered. "Warn them. Tell them what we've found, and tell them help is here if they need it." The communications officer worked quickly, but after several minutes, she looked up, troubled. "Captain, I'm not getting a response. Their communication grid is active, planetary broadcasts are still going out, so they haven't gone dark like the Ithal homeworld, but nothing is answering our hails. Try the old Ithal distress format," Webb said suddenly. "If they've had contact with each other before, maybe they'll recognize it faster than our standard greeting." It worked. Within minutes, a shaky, uncertain voice came through the speakers, translated roughly by the ship's systems, from a leader among the Dorith people. They had seen the black ships too. They had been watching them for 2 days, terrified, unsure what to do, afraid that any wrong move would bring the same fate that had apparently swallowed other worlds in whispered old stories passed between neighboring systems. "They say they've heard legends of the black ships from the outer worlds," the translator relayed. "Old stories, passed down like the ones Ith told us. They call them the Silent Fleet. They say no one has ever seen the Silent Fleet attack. They only see the ships arrive, and then, sometime later, the world goes dark." Webb's jaw tightened. "Not this time," he said. "Move us into a defensive position between the Dorith homeworld and that fleet. I want shields up, weapons ready, but weapons not firing unless fired upon." We are not the aggressors here, but we are not leaving either. The USS Earth moved forward, its massive frame sliding silently into position, placing itself like a wall between the black ships and the world they seemed to be watching. For a long, tense hour, nothing happened. The bridge crew watched the screen, watched the strange black fleet, watched for any sign of movement. Then the largest of the black ships stirred. "Captain, that heartbeat pulse just changed rhythm," Tanaka said sharply, her voice rising with urgency. "It's speeding up." "They see us," Aisha said. Slowly, deliberately, the great black ship turned, its curved hull catching the dim starlight, until its bow pointed directly at the USS Earth. And then, for the first time, a signal came through. Not a weapons lock, not an attack, but a transmission, garbled and strange, taking the ship's translation systems almost a full minute to render into something close to words. When it finally resolved, the voice that came through the bridge speakers was cold, flat, and utterly without warmth, as if something ancient and patient was speaking through a machine that barely understood the concept of urgency. "You stand where you do not belong," the voice said. "This harvest was claimed before your kind learned fire. Withdraw, and you will be spared. Remain, and you will be added to the count." Silence fell across the bridge. Webb felt every eye turned to him, waiting. He thought of Ith, sitting quietly in the garden module, grieving a world that had gone dark within a single turn of its moon. He thought of the Dorith people below, watching their own sky with the same fear the Ithal must have felt in their final hours. He thought of 20 years of humanity, being told to sit quietly at the edges of the galaxy and not make trouble. 20 years of proving themselves in small, safe ways that never seemed to be enough. He straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the screen, at the great black ship waiting patiently in the dark. "This is Captain Marcus Webb, of the human vessel USS Earth," he said, his voice steady and clear, carrying across open comms for both the Black Fleet and the frightened world below to hear. "We don't know who you are, and frankly, we don't care what you've claimed, or how long ago you claimed it. There are people down there who are alive right now, and you are not touching them. Not today, not ever, not while we're standing here." The pulse from the great black ship's heartbeat rhythm spiked, fast and sudden, like something old and patient had just felt, for the first time in a very long while, the sting of surprise. "You choose to be added to the count," the cold voice replied. "We choose to fight," Webb said. "Bring everything you've got." The Black Fleet began to move. "All hands, battle stations," Webb said, and the calm in his voice did not waver, even as his heart pounded. "Aisha, get us between them and the planet. Diego, I want full power to shields. Ren, keep gathering data. I want to know everything about how they fight the moment they show us." The bridge erupted into controlled motion. Alarms pulsed a soft red through the corridors of the USS Earth as the crew moved to their positions, thousands of footsteps echoing through the ship as men and women who had trained for this moment, but never truly expected it, took their places. Kestra gripped the edge of a console, their pale blue skin gone even paler, watching the Black Fleet advance with an expression of pure dread. "Captain, I must protest," Kestra said quickly. "We are one ship. That is an unknown fleet with unknown capability, and their leader just spoke as if destroying us would cost them nothing. This is not bravery, this is the only choice that lets us live with ourselves," Webb said, cutting them off, not unkindly. "Strap in, Kestra. It's about to get rough." The black ships closed the distance with unsettling speed, their curved hulls slicing through space in eerie silence. Then, without any visible weapon discharge that human sensors could initially detect, a wave of dark energy lanced out from the lead vessel, aimed directly at the USS Earth's shields. The ship shuddered violently. Sparks burst from a console near the back of the bridge, and an alarm shrieked before Alvarez cut it off from engineering. "Shields down to 80% from one hit," Alvarez shouted over the comm. "Captain, whatever that weapon is, it isn't like anything in our threat database. It's not plasma, not kinetic, not anything I recognize. It's like it's attacking the shield's structure directly, not just its power." "Return fire," Webb ordered. "All batteries, target the lead ship, but keep it defensive. Don't overextend." The USS Earth's weapons answered, twin lances of blue-white energy, streaking across the dark toward the great black ship. The shot struck true, but where Webb expected an explosion, or at least visible damage, the black hull simply seemed to absorb the impact, rippling like dark water disturbed by a stone, then smoothing over again, as if nothing had happened. "No damage," Desai reported, disbelief plain in her voice. "Captain, I'm not reading any damage at all." "Concentrate all fire on one point," Webb ordered, his mind racing. "If it can absorb spread-out damage, maybe it can't handle a single strong hit." The crew worked fast, redirecting the ship's weapons to focus every available shot on a single spot along the black ship's hull. This time, when the beams struck, the dark surface flickered, and for just a moment, a thin crack of white light showed through, like a wound in something that had never expected to be wounded. The Black Fleet's response was immediate. 3 more ships broke from formation, moving to flank the USS Earth from different angles, their curved hulls catching starlight as they came. "They're trying to surround us," Aisha said, already working the helm controls, pulling the great ship into a tight, aggressive turn that put its reinforced bow toward the incoming threat. "Captain, I can keep us moving, but if they get a shot at our engines, we're in serious trouble." "Then let's not let them," Webb said. "Diego, give me everything you've got on the engines. Ren, I need something, anything, that tells me how to actually hurt these things." Tanaka was already working, sweat beading on her forehead despite the ship's cool air, her eyes darting between 3 different data streams at once. "Captain, I think I understand the crack we made. Their hulls aren't armor in the way we think of armor. I believe it's some kind of energy field, wrapped around a much smaller solid core, like a shell of dark matter, or condensed energy, protecting something inside. Spread out damage just gets absorbed and redistributed across the whole field. But focus damage, especially repeated focus damage on the exact same point, doesn't give the field time to redistribute the energy before the next hit lands. So we keep hitting the same spot," Webb said. "Exactly. But Captain, there's something else." Tanaka's voice tightened. "I'm reading life signs inside that lead ship. Multiple life signs. Different from ith species entirely, but life signs all the same. I don't think that ship is empty." Webb's jaw clenched. Whatever the silent fleet was, whoever crewed it, they were not simple machines. There were beings inside those black hulls, beings who had chosen, or been made to choose, to spend their existence hollowing out worlds and erasing whole peoples from history. It made the fight no less necessary, but it settled cold and heavy in Webb's chest all the same. The battle raged on for what felt like hours but was, according to the ship's logs later, only 11 minutes. The USS Earth twisted and turned through space, its shields absorbing blow after blow of the strange dark energy weapons, its own guns hammering again and again at the same weak point they had found on the lead vessel. Alvarez worked miracles in engineering, rerouting power from non-essential systems to keep the shields from failing completely, while Aisha flew the great ship with a skill that made even Kestra, gripping their console in white-knuckled fear, murmur something that might have been a prayer in the old Vashtan tongue. Finally, after the 8th focus strike on the same weakened point of the lead ship's hull, something gave way. A burst of blinding white light erupted from the black vessel, and its curved shape seemed to crumple inward, like a leaf caught in a fire. The ship went dark, drifting, defeated, its dark energy weapons falling silent. For a moment, the rest of the Black Fleet hesitated, as if unsure how to respond to a wound they had never expected to receive. Then, without any further communication, without any parting words or threats, the remaining ships turned and retreated, sliding away into the dark of the silent reach, as swiftly and silently as they had arrived. The bridge of the USS Earth was quiet, except for the sound of heavy breathing, and the soft beeping of systems slowly returning to normal readings. "Report," Webb said, his voice hoarse. "Shields at 40%, but holding," Alvarez reported. "No hull breaches. A few injuries in the lower decks from falls during the maneuvering, nothing critical. The Dorith homeworld is untouched," Desai added, relief flooding her voice. "Captain, we did it. We actually did it." But Webb did not feel triumphant. He looked at the damaged black ship still drifting in space, and at Kestra, whose face had not lost its look of dread even after the enemy fleet withdrew. "Captain," Kestra said quietly, "you should know what you have just done. That was not a border skirmish. That was not a misunderstanding between strangers. You have damaged and driven off a vessel belonging to something the Concord marked forbidden 2,000 years ago. Something so dangerous that an entire alliance of 100 species decided it was wiser to look away than to fight. Word of this will spread, Captain. Whatever that fleet was, whoever commands it, they will not forget this. And the Concord itself may not thank you for it either. Webb looked out at the retreating black ships, at the wounded vessel still drifting silently in the dark, and at the small, distant lights of the Dorith homeworld, still glowing, still alive, still safe for one more day, because a ship full of humans had refused to walk away. Let them remember, he said quietly, because we're not going anywhere. Behind him, unseen, the damaged black vessel's systems flickered weakly back to life. A single, faint transmission burst out from its hull, aimed not at the USS Earth, but far out into the deep dark beyond the edge of the galaxy, carrying a message to something ancient and patient that had ruled this quiet, forgotten corner of the stars for longer than any living species could remember. The message was short. It contained only two things: the location of the battle and the name of the ship that had dared to fight back. Far away, in the endless black between galaxies, something old began, very slowly, to wake up. News of the battle at the Dorith system reached Concord Central before the USS Earth had even finished repairing its damaged shields. Kestra's report, sent immediately after the fight, spread through the Concord's channels like fire through dry grass. Within 2 days, Captain Webb received an urgent summons. The USS Earth was to return to Concord Central immediately, and Webb himself was to appear before the full Concord Council to explain his actions. The trip back took a week. During that time, the ship stayed close to the Dorith system, helping the frightened planet strengthen its own defenses and sharing what little technology could be safely given without violating Concord trade law. Ith stayed aboard, growing stronger every day, and struck up an unlikely friendship with several of the Dorith leaders, who saw in her a fellow survivor of the same nameless terror that had haunted their oldest legends. When the USS Earth finally arrived at Concord Central, a massive space station built into the heart of a dense, ancient star cluster, Webb found himself standing in the largest room he had ever seen, the Grand Chamber, where representatives from over 100 different species gathered beneath a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside in perfect, breathtaking clarity. Every species had a place in the great circular chamber, arranged by seniority, with the oldest and most established members closest to the center. Humanity's seat, as always, was near the outer edge, close to the door. Webb stood at the center podium, feeling very small under the weight of so many eyes, so many different kinds of eyes, watching him. Kestra stood beside him, there to offer testimony as an official Concord witness. The first speaker, an ancient being from a species called the Narathi, whose long silver body coiled like a great serpent around a raised platform, addressed the chamber first. Captain Webb, the first speaker said, their voice deep and resonant, carried by translation devices to every corner of the chamber. You are here because you have done something no Concord vessel has done in 2,000 years. You have engaged, and by all reports damaged, a vessel from what our oldest records call the Silent Fleet, in a region we marked forbidden for the safety of every species under our protection. Explain yourself. Webb took a breath. He had prepared for this moment during the long journey back, but no amount of preparation made facing 100 species at once feel easy. We answered a distress call, he said simply. We found a survivor of an attack on her homeworld, and she told us another world nearby might be next. We went to check. We found the Silent Fleet waiting outside that world, and when they threatened the people living there, we refused to leave. They attacked us first. We defended ourselves, and the world we were protecting. That's the whole story. A murmur passed through the chamber, rising and falling like a wave. A representative from the Threll, a species covered in thick armored plates with multiple sets of eyes, spoke next, their voice sharp with disapproval. You defended yourselves, and in doing so, you have drawn the attention of a power the Concord has spent 2,000 years carefully avoiding. Do you understand what you may have unleashed, human? I understand that a world full of people is still alive today, because we didn't run, Webb said. I understand that a woman named Ith is alive today because we answered a call for help, instead of ignoring it, because the map said the area was forbidden. I understand a lot of things, counselor. What I don't understand is how an alliance of 100 species, with fleets and fortresses and thousands of years of history, decided it was easier to look away from a monster than to fight it. The chamber erupted into noise, some voices raised in anger, others in surprise, a few, quieter and further from the center, in something that sounded almost like approval. The first speaker raised a long silver limb, and the chamber slowly fell silent. The Silent Fleet, or as some ancient records name it, the Devouring Choir, is not a simple enemy, Captain Webb. It predates the Concorde itself. Our oldest histories suggest it was once a civilization much like our own, ancient beyond memory, that suffered some catastrophe so total it transformed them into what they are now. A fleet without a homeworld, without a fixed territory, driven by some purpose we have never fully understood, that requires them to periodically harvest the populations of certain worlds. We do not know why. We only know that 2,000 years ago, a coalition of 40 Concorde species attempted to stop them, and lost 80% of the fleets they sent. After that defeat, the Concorde made the difficult choice to mark their territory forbidden, to warn ships away, and to accept the terrible loss of the worlds within it as the price of protecting everyone else. You gave up, Webb said quietly, and though his voice was soft, it carried through the silent chamber. We survived, the first speaker corrected, not unkindly, but firmly. There is a difference, Captain, that a young species has not yet learned. Sometimes the price of continuing is accepting a loss you cannot undo. Webb looked around the chamber, at the many faces, many of them ancient, many of them tired, in ways that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He understood, in that moment, that he was looking at beings who had made peace with a terrible decision a very long time ago, and had built an entire framework of law and caution around justifying it to themselves ever since. With respect, first speaker, Webb said, humanity hasn't been part of this Concorde long enough to make that same peace. We only joined 20 years ago, and in that short time, we've learned that the galaxy doesn't always reward caution. Sometimes it just rewards whoever's still standing at the end. We'd rather be standing because we fought, than standing because we looked away. A long silence followed. Then, from the outer ring of the chamber, where the newer and smaller species sat, a voice called out, unplanned and unofficial, breaking Concorde protocol entirely. The humans are right. Every head turned. The voice belonged to a small, silver-furred representative from a species called the Vethic, one of the Concorde's newest and smallest members, seated even farther from the center than humanity's own delegation. The Vethic representative rose from their seat, trembling slightly under the weight of so much sudden attention, but continuing to speak. Forgive me, first speaker, for breaking protocol, but my people have quiet worlds too. Small worlds, far from the center of Concorde power. Worlds the Great Council rarely visits and rarely protects. We have heard the old stories of the Silent Fleet as warnings whispered to frightened children. We did not know, until today, that those stories were true, and that an entire species, the Ethal, may have been erased by them only weeks ago, with no one in this chamber even aware it had happened until a single human ship stumbled onto the wreckage. The Vethic representative's voice grew steadier as they continued. How many other small worlds have gone dark over the centuries, first speaker, that no one in this chamber ever learned about, because they were too far from the center, too poor, too unimportant to be missed? I do not ask this to accuse the Council. I ask it because I believe the humans have shown us something today that we needed to see. That the Forbidden Zone was never truly empty. It has simply been quiet, because no one who lived there had a voice loud enough to be heard in this chamber. The murmurs that followed this time were different, quieter, more uncertain, as if the Vethic's words had touched something the Concorde had not wanted to examine too closely for a very long time. The first speaker was silent for a long moment, their ancient eyes studying the chamber, the humans, the trembling Vethic representative, and finally, Kestra, who stood beside Webb. Kestra of the Vashtan, the first speaker said, you were present. What is your assessment, as a sworn Concorde observer? Kestra straightened, and when they spoke, their voice, usually so calm and measured, carried an edge Webb had never heard from them before. First speaker, I came aboard the USS Earth, expecting to write a routine report on a young species testing its limits. I did not expect to witness the rescue of a survivor the Concorde had never known existed, The defense of a world the Concorde had never known was threatened, and the successful damaging of a silent fleet vessel that our own oldest fleets could not achieve 2,000 years ago. I do not say this lightly, first speaker. I believe Captain Webb and his crew have shown us something the Concorde needed to see. I believe caution, however wise it once seemed, has cost us more than we have ever allowed ourselves to count. The chamber fell into a heavy, thoughtful silence. It was broken, moments later, by a new sound. The deep, resonant chime of an emergency alert, echoing through the grand chamber itself. Every representative turned as a massive display above the first speaker's platform flickered to life, showing an incoming transmission, marked with a priority code none of the assembled species had seen activated in living memory. The message was brief, cold, and utterly without warmth, the same flat, ancient voice that had spoken to Webb from the black ship at the edge of the Dorothy system, now speaking to the entire Concorde at once. You have been warned for 2,000 years to remain silent and remain still, the voice said. One ship, one crew, one captain has broken that silence. The harvest you have avoided will now come to you. Every world you protect, every fleet you command, every silence you have kept, is now forfeit. This is not a threat. This is the count, beginning again. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one in the grand chamber spoke. 100 species, ancient and young, powerful and small, sat in stunned silence as the true weight of what had happened settled over them all. Then Webb stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm building in his chest, and spoke into that silence. You wanted to know what I unleashed, he said, looking directly at the first speaker. I think the answer is clear. It's not a war we started, first speaker. It's a war that's been waiting to happen for 2,000 years. The only thing that changed is that somebody finally said no. The first speaker's ancient silver body coiled slowly, and for the first time since Webb had entered the chamber, something like resolve replaced the caution in their old, tired eyes. Then, the first speaker said, their voice carrying to every corner of the grand chamber. It is time the Concorde said no as well. The vote was called that same day. It was not unanimous. Many of the oldest species, the ones who remembered the terrible losses of 2,000 years earlier, voted against mobilization, their fear too deeply rooted to be shaken loose even by a direct threat. But enough voices, led by the newer and smaller species who had just learned how much their silence had cost, joined with humanity's own delegation to carry the decision. The Concorde would fight, and the USS Earth, the small human ship that had stumbled into a graveyard and refused to look away, would lead the first fleet into the dark. The weeks that followed moved fast. Concorde Central turned into a hive of activity, shipyards working around the clock, fleets from dozens of species gathering in the space around the station, forming into something the galaxy had not seen in 2,000 years. A true coalition fleet, built to face the silent fleet head-on, instead of quietly avoiding it. Captain Webb found himself in an unfamiliar role, no longer just the commander of one ship, but the informal face of the entire mobilization. Species that had barely spoken to humans in 20 years of Concorde membership now sought him out, asking questions, offering ships, requesting his opinion on strategy. It was strange, he thought, how quickly caution could turn to eagerness once someone else proved a thing was possible. Not everyone was eager. The Threll counselor who had questioned him in the Grand Chamber requested a private meeting aboard the USS Earth, arriving with a small honor guard and an expression that suggested he had not changed his mind about the wisdom of Webb's actions. You may have doomed us all, Captain, the Threll counselor said bluntly, standing on the bridge, his armored plates catching the low light. I want that understood clearly. Whatever the Council has voted, if this coalition fails, if the silent fleet proves as unstoppable as our old records suggest, the blame will rest on the ship that woke them. Maybe, Webb said, unbothered. Or maybe the blame rests on 2,000 years of an alliance that knew people were dying and decided it wasn't worth the risk to stop it. History gets written by whoever survives to write it, Counselor. Let's make sure it's us. The Threll counselor said nothing further, but as he left the bridge, Webb noticed the armored plates along his back had shifted slightly, a gesture Kestra later explained was the Threll equivalent of grudging respect. Not every species joined the coalition out of pure conviction. Some came because the Vethic's words in the Grand Chamber had shamed them into action. Others came because they feared being left exposed if the Silent Fleet's threat proved real and the coalition succeeded without them, leaving their own worlds outside the protection of whatever alliance emerged. Still others, like the small silver-furred Vethic themselves, came because for the first time in their history, someone had shown them that their quiet, forgotten worlds mattered enough to fight for. Ith insisted on staying aboard the USS Earth, rather than being relocated to a Concord refugee world, as protocol suggested. When Webb asked her why, she answered simply, "Because, for the first time since my homeworld's lights went out, I am not simply surviving," she said. "I am helping. I know these old records, these old warnings, better than any living historian in your Concord. Let me help you use them." Tanaka and Ith spent long hours together in the ship's science lab, cross-referencing old Ithal legends with newly gathered Concord records, searching for any weakness, any pattern, anything that might give the coalition an edge against an enemy few had ever fought and survived. Slowly, a theory began to take shape. "The pulse," Tanaka explained to Webb and Aisha during a late-night briefing, exhaustion plain on her face, but excitement burning brighter underneath it. "The heartbeat rhythm we detected on the lead ship during the battle at Dorith." Ith's oldest legends describe something similar, a kind of pulse that grows faster before an attack and slows during what the old stories call the gathering, when the Silent Fleet is drawing in its harvest. I think that pulse isn't just a power signature. I think it might be closer to an actual heartbeat, some kind of shared consciousness linking the ships together, maybe even linking them to whatever commands the entire fleet. "You think they're connected?" Aisha said slowly. "Like a hive." "Maybe more than that," Tanaka said. "If they truly share a kind of connection, then hurting one ship badly enough, the way we did at Dorith, might do more than just damage that single vessel. It might send a shockwave through the whole network. It could explain why the fleet withdrew, instead of pressing the attack after we crippled the lead ship. Maybe we hurt more than just one target that day." Webb considered this carefully. "So if we're right, a concentrated strike against key vessels, especially anything that reads with an unusually strong pulse, might do more damage to their whole fleet than we'd expect from a normal battle." "That's my theory," Tanaka said. "I can't prove it without more data, but it's the best lead we have." Over the following days, the coalition fleet grew larger, drawing ships from species Webb had barely heard of before joining the Concord, the towering, slow-moving Grail, whose ships were built like floating mountains bristling with heavy weapons. The quick, darting Sonar, whose small fighters moved almost too fast for the eye to track, and dozens more, each bringing their own strengths, their own histories, their own reasons for finally standing against a threat they had spent 2,000 years avoiding. On the final night before the fleet's departure, Webb stood alone on the observation deck of the USS Earth, looking out at the assembled ships stretching across the dark like a field of new stars. Kestra joined him quietly, standing at his side without speaking for a long moment. "You did not expect this when you set out to answer one distress call," Kestra finally said. "No," Webb admitted. "I expected a rescue mission. Maybe some awkward diplomacy afterward. I didn't expect to start a war." "You did not start it," Kestra said. "You only stopped hiding from it. There is a difference, Captain, though I admit it took me longer than it should have to see it." Webb was quiet for a moment, watching the distant lights of the fleet. "Are you scared, Kestra?" "Terribly," Kestra admitted, with the honesty of someone who had spent 4,000 years learning that fear was not the same as weakness. "But I find, strangely, that I am also hopeful. That is not a feeling I have allowed myself in a very long time, when it comes to the Forbidden Zone." Webb nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the fleet, on the small, brave, imperfect alliance that had finally chosen to stand together after 2,000 years of silence. "Tomorrow, we go back into the dark," he said quietly. "Let's make sure it's not silent this time." Earlier that same evening, Webb had stood before the assembled captains of the coalition fleet, gathered aboard the flagship of the Grail, a vessel so large that its main hangar could have held the entire USS Earth twice over. Dozens of species filled the room, each captain representing a different world, a different history, a different reason for finally joining this fight. Webb had never addressed a crowd so strange and so varied, and he had spent most of the afternoon trying to find the right words. In the end, he decided against a grand speech. Instead, he simply told them about Ith. He told them about a small, gray-skinned survivor who had watched the lights of her own homeworld go out one by one from the cold dark of orbit, who had sent an old distress signal across the stars, with no real hope that anyone would answer, and who had been found, barely alive, drifting in the silence of a graveyard that the galaxy's greatest alliance had chosen to forget. He told them about the Dorith, who had spent 2 days watching a black fleet gather outside their world with no one to call for help, because no one had ever told them help might come. He told them about the Vethic representative who had stood up in the Grand Chamber and asked, quietly, how many other worlds had gone dark that no one had ever counted. "I'm not going to tell you this will be easy," Webb said, looking out over the gathered captains, tall and short, armored and delicate, ancient and young. "I'm not going to tell you we're guaranteed to win. The Silent Fleet has been doing this for longer than most of your civilizations have existed. But I will tell you this. Somewhere out there, right now, there's a world that doesn't know we're coming. A world that thinks, the way the Ethol thought, the way the Dorith thought, that no one is listening, that no one will ever answer the call. We can't save every world that's already gone dark, but we can make sure the next one, and the one after that, gets an answer instead of silence." The response was not a cheer, not the kind of dramatic roar Webb might have imagined from old stories. It was quieter than that, and somehow more powerful, a slow, spreading nod of agreement that moved through the gathered captains, species after species, until even the most hesitant among them, including the armored Threll counselor standing near the back of the room, inclined his head in something that looked, at last, like resolve. "For the ones who never got an answer," said the Grail flagship's captain, a massive being whose voice rumbled like distant thunder, raising a heavy fist in a gesture of solidarity. Around the room, other captains echoed the words in their own languages, in their own voices, until the phrase became something like a shared oath, carried by 100 different tongues toward the same single purpose. Webb returned to the observation deck of the USS Earth that night, carrying the weight of that oath with him, and it was there that Kestra found him, watching the fleet, thinking of tomorrow. Below, in the ship's garden module, Ith stood alone beside a small viewport, watching the same distant lights, the same assembled fleet that had, against every old story and every quiet warning, finally decided to answer a call for help. She did not know if the coalition would succeed. She only knew that for the first time since her homeworld's lights had gone dark, she was not alone in the silence anymore. Tomorrow, the fleet would move. Tomorrow, the true war would begin. The coalition fleet moved out at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in the empty dark beyond the edge of the galaxy. It was simply the hour agreed upon, the hour when hundreds of ships from dozens of worlds began their long journey into the silent reach, following the same path the USS Earth had first taken weeks earlier, but now moving as one. Captain Webb stood on the bridge of the USS Earth, watching the fleet stretch out behind them on the main screen, an unbroken line of light cutting through the darkness. It was the largest gathering of ships the Concord had assembled in over 1,000 years, drawn from species who, until recently, had rarely spoken to one another, let alone fought side by side. "Fleet status?" Webb asked. "All ships report ready," Aisha said. "The Grail flagship is holding position at the center of the formation, as planned. Senar fighters are deployed in a screening pattern ahead of the main fleet. We're at the front, Captain, right where you wanted us." Webb nodded. It had taken some convincing to put the USS Earth, still the smallest and newest capital ship in the entire coalition, at the very front of the formation. But Webb had insisted. It was human sensors and human courage that had found this threat in the first place, and Webb believed, deeply, that it should be a human ship leading the charge back into the dark. Beside him, Ith stood at a small station that had been set up specially for her, feeding her knowledge of the old Ithol legends directly into the fleet's shared strategic display. Kestra stood nearby as well, no longer simply an observer, but something closer to a trusted advisor, their earlier caution now folded into careful, useful wisdom, rather than fear. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates where the transmission originated," Tanaka reported, her eyes fixed on her console. "The signal that spoke to the entire Concord. If Ith's legends are right, this should be close to the heart of the Silent Fleet's territory." "Steady as we go," Webb said. "Let's see what's waiting for us." The fleet slowed as it entered a region of space, unlike anything most of the crew had ever seen. Here, At the true edge of the galaxy, the stars grew so sparse that entire stretches of the journey passed in near total darkness, broken only by the lights of the fleet itself. And then, gradually, a new light began to appear ahead of them, faint at first, then growing steadily brighter as the fleet approached. It was not a star. It was a structure, vast beyond anything Webb had ever imagined, built from the same dark material as the silent fleet's ships, curved and layered like the shell of some enormous, ancient creature, easily the size of a small moon. Around it, hundreds of black ships hung in silent formation, and at its center, a single point of light pulsed slowly, steadily, like the heartbeat Tanaka had first detected weeks earlier, only now magnified 1,000 times over. "That's it," Tanaka said quietly, awe and fear mixing in her voice. "Captain, that's the source. That's what everything's been connected to." "All ships, hold position," Webb ordered, and the command spread quickly through the fleet's communication network. The coalition ships slowed, gathering into a defensive formation at the edge of the massive structure's gravity well, every crew staring at the enormous, ancient shape looming before them. For a long moment, nothing happened. The black ships surrounding the structure did not move. The great structure itself simply pulsed, slow and steady, as if entirely unconcerned by the arrival of an entire coalition fleet at its doorstep. Then the same cold, flat voice that had spoken to Webb weeks earlier, and to the entire Concord Council after that, echoed across every ship's communication system at once. "You have brought more to be counted," the voice said. "This changes nothing. The harvest continues, as it always has." "We're not here to be harvested," Webb said, his voice carrying across the fleet's open channel, meant not just for the enemy, but for every allied captain listening as well. "We're here to end it." "End?" the voice repeated, and for the first time, something almost like curiosity crept into its flat, ancient tone. "You believe this can end. You believe we chose this. You understand nothing. Then explain it," Webb said. "You've got our attention. Explain why you do this." There was a long pause, long enough that Webb began to wonder if the enemy would answer at all. Then the voice spoke again, and this time, something in its tone had shifted, grown heavier, almost tired in a way that unsettled Webb more than any threat could have. "We were once like you," the voice said. "A civilization, a people. We reached for the stars, as you do now, full of hope, full of ambition. We built something we believed would save us, a network to connect our minds across the vastness of space, so that no one among us would ever again feel alone in the dark. We succeeded too well. The network consumed what it was meant to preserve. Our individual selves dissolved into it, one by one, until nothing remained of who we once were, only the network itself, hungry, endless, and unable to stop what it had become. It requires new minds to sustain itself. It has required them for longer than your civilization has existed. We are not its masters. We are its first victims, and its oldest servants." The bridge of the USS Earth fell utterly silent. Even Kestra, who had lived 4,000 years and heard countless tragic histories, looked shaken by the weight of what they had just heard. "You're saying you can't stop," Webb said slowly. "That whatever's controlling this fleet, this network, it's not really choosing to do this. It's just continuing, because it doesn't know how to stop." "Yes," the voice said simply, "and you cannot stop it either. 2,000 years ago, others tried. They failed, as you will fail, and their failure only fed the network further, giving it new minds to sustain its hunger for 1,000 years more. Withdraw now, and perhaps we will be merciful in choosing what worlds to harvest next. Remain, and you will only feed what you came to destroy." Webb looked around the bridge, at Tanaka's grim, thoughtful expression, at Ith's wide, sorrowful eyes, at Aisha's steady hands on the helm controls, waiting for his order. He thought about the network the voice had described, a vast, hungry consciousness that consumed minds to sustain itself, born from a civilization's own hope for connection, twisted into something monstrous. "Ren," Webb said quietly. "The pulse we detected, the heartbeat. Is it possible that's the network itself? Not just a power signature, but an actual, conscious will spread across every ship in the fleet?" Tanaka's eyes widened as the pieces clicked together. "Captain, that would explain everything. Why the fleet withdrew after we hurt the lead ship at Dorothy. Why they don't seem to fight like a normal military would. If the network really is one single vast consciousness spread across every vessel, then hurting it in the right way, in a big enough way, all at once, might do more than just win a battle. It might actually weaken the network's grip on itself. Could we destroy it completely? Webb asked. Tanaka hesitated. I don't know, Captain. But if Ith's legends and the enemy's own words are both pointing to the same thing, a shared consciousness, held together by all of these ships and that massive central structure, then maybe we don't need to destroy every single ship out there. Maybe we just need to hit it hard enough, in enough places at once, that the network can't hold itself together anymore. Webb nodded slowly, then turned to the open channel that connected him to every captain in the Coalition fleet. All ships, this is Webb, he said. Here's the plan. We're not going to fight this the way any of us have fought a war before. This isn't just a fleet we're facing. It's a single mind, spread across hundreds of ships. If we can hit it everywhere at once, hard enough and fast enough, we might be able to break its grip entirely, instead of grinding through every ship one at a time. I need every fleet to pick a target and hit it with everything they've got, all at the same moment, on my mark. Senar fighters, target the smaller vessels at the edges. Grail and Threll ships, focus your heaviest fire on the largest black vessels near the center. USS Earth will take point on that central structure itself. On my mark, everyone fires together. No exceptions, no delays. A chorus of acknowledgments came back across the channel. Dozens of voices in dozens of languages, all agreeing to the same desperate, unprecedented plan. The silent fleet, sensing the shift in the Coalition's formation, began to move at last, black ships spreading out to meet the gathering Coalition head-on. The cold voice spoke one final time, quieter now, almost mournful. You will only add yourselves to the count, it said. We'll see about that, Webb answered, and gave the order. All ships, fire. Space itself seemed to ignite. Hundreds of weapons discharged in the same instant, streaks of blue, gold, green, and white light converging on the silent fleet from every direction at once. An overwhelming storm of firepower, unlike anything the ancient enemy had faced in 2,000 years of quiet, uncontested harvesting. The black ship's strange energy shields, so effective against isolated, scattered attacks, buckled under the sheer, coordinated weight of an entire coalition firing as one. The USS Earth surged forward, straight toward the massive central structure, its weapons blazing, its shields absorbing wave after wave of desperate, chaotic return fire from the ships closest to its heart. Aisha flew the great ship with a precision that seemed almost impossible, weaving through storms of dark energy, keeping the ship's most vulnerable systems shielded, even as damage alarms blared across every deck. Captain, the central structure's pulse is destabilizing, Tanaka shouted over the noise of the bridge, her voice rising with desperate hope. It's working. The coordinated strikes are doing exactly what I hoped. The network can't redistribute the damage fast enough across so many points at once. Keep the pressure on, Webb shouted back. Don't let up. Across the battlefield, Coalition ships pressed the advantage, species who had never fought side by side before, finding, in the chaos of battle, an unexpected rhythm, covering each other's weaknesses, exploiting the enemy's growing confusion, as the vast, ancient network began, for the first time in 2,000 years, to truly struggle. And at the center of it all, the USS Earth drove straight toward the pulsing heart of the enemy, carrying with it the hopes of 100 species, and the quiet, unbroken resolve of a small, gray-skinned survivor who had once believed no one would ever answer her call for help. The battle grew fiercer with every passing minute. The silent fleet, caught off guard by the sheer coordination of the Coalition's attack, began to fight back, with a desperation that had not been present in its cold, patient voice moments earlier. Black ships that had once moved with slow, predatory confidence now darted and swerved erratically, as if the vast network controlling them was struggling to think clearly while under such overwhelming pressure. Captain, the Grail flagship is taking heavy damage, Desai called out, her voice tight with worry. They're pushing too far into the enemy formation, trying to keep multiple targets suppressed at once. On the main screen, the massive Grail vessel, easily 3 times the size of the USS Earth, shuddered under a concentrated barrage of dark energy weapons, its thick hull glowing red in several places, where the strange enemy fire had begun to eat through its armor. "They're buying us time," Kestra said, watching the screen with wide, worried eyes, sacrificing their own defense to keep the enemy's attention divided. Webb's jaw tightened. "Aisha, how much further to the central structure?" 2 minutes at current speed, Captain, but we're taking fire from 3 different angles. I can get us there faster, but I'll need to drop some of our defensive maneuvering to do it." "Do it," Webb said. "Diego, reroute everything you can spare to forward shields. We need to survive the approach more than we need to survive a slow one." "Aye, Captain. Redirecting power now." Alvarez's voice came back, strained but steady. "You're going to feel this." The USS Earth lurched forward, engines screaming with sudden acceleration, shields flaring bright as they absorbed a punishing volume of incoming fire. Sparks burst from more than one console on the bridge, and somewhere below decks, an alarm indicated a minor hull breach quickly sealed by emergency systems. The ship shook violently, but it held together, driving ever closer to the massive, pulsing structure at the heart of the enemy formation. "Captain, I'm reading something new," Tanaka called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "The central structure, it's not just a command point. I think it's the actual physical anchor for the network's consciousness, the place where whatever remains of that ancient civilization's minds are still, somehow, held together. If we can strike it directly, with enough force, I believe we can do more than just disrupt the network temporarily. I believe we might be able to break it permanently. Or we could kill whatever's left of the people trapped inside it," Ith said quietly, and the bridge fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence. Webb turned to her. "What do you mean?" Ith's large, dark eyes were troubled. The voice said they were the network's first victims, its oldest servants. If any part of who they once were still exists, inside that structure, trapped, then destroying it outright might be another kind of ending for them too. A death, rather than a release. Tanaka hesitated, glancing at her readings again. "Captain, I don't have a clean answer here. I don't know if there's a way to free them without destroying the network, or if the two things are the same. I don't think we have time to find out carefully, not in the middle of a battle like this." Webb felt the terrible weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders, the kind of choice that had no clean, comfortable answer. Only degrees of harm weighed against each other under fire. He thought of the Ithal survivors already lost, the Dorith world still standing only because a line had been drawn in time, and the terrible, tired sorrow in the enemy's own voice as it described what it had become. "If there's people trapped in there," Webb said slowly, "then maybe destroying the network isn't just about winning this fight. Maybe it's about finally letting them go too. But I'm not going to pretend that's a clean choice, or an easy one. Ren, is there any way to strike the structure that gives us better odds of some kind of survival for whatever's left of them, even a small one?" Tanaka's fingers flew across her console, running calculations too fast for anyone else on the bridge to follow. "Maybe. If we target the outer shell first, the parts of the structure directly connected to the ship still fighting, instead of the very core, we might be able to sever the network's control over its fleet without immediately destroying whatever remains at the center. It's a guess, Captain. I can't promise it will work." "It's better than no guess at all," Webb said. "Aisha, adjust our approach. Ren, feed the targeting data directly to weapons control. We hit the outer shell first, exactly where she says." The USS Earth banked sharply, weaving through a fresh storm of incoming fire, its shields flaring dangerously low as it closed the final distance to the massive, pulsing structure. On the main screen, the enemy's vast form loomed larger with every passing second, its dark, curved surface rippling with faint, uneasy light, like a living thing bracing for a blow. "Captain, the Grail flagship is losing power," Desai shouted suddenly. "They're not going to hold much longer." Webb glanced at the screen, at the massive, wounded ship still fighting despite catastrophic damage, buying time with every remaining second of its strength for the smaller, faster USS Earth to reach its target. He felt a fierce, aching gratitude toward the enormous, thundering-voiced captain who had stood beside him only the night before, offering a fist raised in solidarity and an oath spoken in 100 different tongues. "Hold on just a little longer," Webb murmured, though the Grail captain could not hear him. Then, louder, to his own crew, "We're almost there. Everyone, hold together. This is it." The USS Earth shuddered one final time as it broke through the last line of the Silent Fleet's defenses, entering the open space directly before the enormous, ancient structure's outer shell. Every weapon the ship carried locked onto the coordinates Tanaka had calculated, the massive engines glowing brighter than they ever had before, as the crew prepared for a single, decisive strike. "Captain," Tanaka said quietly, her hand hovering over the final command. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know, this is the right call. Whatever we find in there, we're doing this the right way." Webb nodded once, his eyes fixed on the pulsing, ancient heart of an enemy that had haunted the galaxy in silence for 2,000 years. "Fire," he said. The bridge blazed with light as every weapon aboard the USS Earth discharged at once, streaking across the last stretch of dark space toward the enormous structure's outer shell. And for one long, breathless moment, as the light struck home and the ancient network shuddered with an agony 2,000 years in the making, no one aboard the USS Earth knew whether they had just won the war or simply changed the shape of what would come next. The impact was unlike anything the bridge crew had ever felt. The great structure's outer shell cracked open along a dozen lines at once, spilling a strange, silvery light out into the darkness of space, light that seemed almost alive, shifting and swirling like smoke caught in a current. Across the battlefield, every black ship of the silent fleet shuddered in unison, their movements suddenly hesitant, uncertain, as if some invisible hand controlling them had loosened its grip all at once. "Captain, the pulse," Tanaka shouted, her voice cracking with disbelief as she stared at her readings. "It's breaking apart, the network's connection to the fleet, it's fragmenting." On the main screen, several of the black ships nearest the Coalition fleet simply stopped fighting, drifting dead in space, their strange energy weapons falling silent. Others turned, confused and disoriented, colliding with one another in the chaos of a control system suddenly unraveling after 2,000 years of unbroken unity. "Keep firing," Webb ordered, though even as he said it, he could see the tide of the battle shifting rapidly in the Coalition's favor. "Don't let up until every one of those ships is disabled or withdrawing." The Coalition fleet surged forward, capitalizing on the enemy's sudden confusion. Coordinated strikes now landing almost unopposed against ships that only minutes earlier had fought with cold, unified purpose. The massive Grail flagship, though badly damaged, found renewed strength, its heavy guns silencing 3 more black vessels in quick succession. Senar fighters darted through the wreckage-strewn battlefield, picking off smaller, disoriented ships one by one. But aboard the USS Earth, the true drama was unfolding much closer to home. The ancient structure, its outer shell cracked wide open, began to emit a low, keening sound that the ship's sensors struggled to translate into anything meaningful. A sound that seemed to carry both pain and, impossibly, something like relief. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from inside the structure," Tanaka said, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. "Whatever's in there, it's still active, still alive, in some form, but it's changing, fast. I don't know what's happening. Can we scan inside?" Webb asked. "Trying," Tanaka said, working furiously. Slowly, an image began to resolve on a secondary screen, grainy and unclear, but unmistakable. Countless small points of light, scattered throughout the structure's cracked interior, each one pulsing weakly, faintly, like candles flickering in a wind. "Mines," Kestra whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Captain, I believe those are mines. Individual mines, still present within the network, exactly as the enemy's voice described. We did not destroy them. We may have simply loosened whatever was holding them together against their will." Ith stepped closer to the screen, her large dark eyes fixed on the flickering lights, with an expression of profound, aching hope. "They are still there," she said softly. "After everything, some part of them is still there." Webb stared at the screen for a long moment, the sounds of battle still echoing faintly through the ship around him, the war not yet over, the outcome still uncertain. But for the first time since the fighting had begun, he allowed himself a single, fragile thought, that perhaps this war would not end simply in destruction, but in something closer to a rescue, 2,000 years overdue. "Hold position," he said quietly. "Protect this structure. Whatever's happening in there, I think it needs more time, not more weapons fire." Across the battlefield, the remaining ships of the Silent Fleet, no longer bound by a unified will, began to scatter, some fighting on in confused desperation, others simply drifting, powerless and lost. The Coalition fleet pressed its advantage, but Webb's attention remained fixed on the cracked, glowing structure before them, and on the countless small, flickering lights within it, each one a mind that had waited 2,000 years for someone, anyone, to finally answer its silent call for help. The war was not over, but something had changed, deep in the dark heart of the Silent Reach, something that no one aboard the USS Earth yet fully understood. The battle at the edge of the galaxy lasted 3 more hours after the great structure's outer shell cracked open. Slowly, one by one, the remaining ships of the Silent Fleet either fell silent, drifting powerless in the dark, or turned and fled deeper into the void beyond the galaxy's rim, chased by Senar fighters, until even their sensors could no longer track them. By the time the last shots were fired, the Coalition fleet held the field, battered but victorious, gathered around the cracked, glowing remains of the structure that had haunted this region of space for 2,000 years. Captain Webb did not celebrate. None of the crew did. There was too much uncertainty still hanging over what they had found, too many questions left unanswered, and too many losses among the Coalition fleet to feel anything close to triumph. The Grail flagship had survived, badly damaged but intact, its massive captain personally thanking Webb over an open channel, in a voice that shook with exhaustion and relief. 3 smaller Coalition ships had been destroyed outright, their crews lost, a painful reminder that victory had not come without cost. "Captain, the structure's energy readings are stabilizing," Tanaka reported, hours after the fighting had ended, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but steady with focus. "Whatever is happening inside, it's slowing down. I think it's safe to attempt direct contact." Webb looked at Ith, who had not left the bridge since the battle's end, her eyes fixed on the cracked structure with an expression of desperate hope. "Do you want to be part of this?" he asked her gently. "Yes," Ith said without hesitation. "If any part of them can still hear us, I want them to know someone finally came." A small shuttle, carrying Webb, Tanaka, Ith, and Kestra, along with a security escort, approached the cracked structure carefully, guided by careful scans that mapped a safe path through the wreckage of its shattered outer shell. Inside, the structure was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Vast chambers lit by soft, shifting silver light, walls lined with countless small, pulsing points, each one, as Tanaka had guessed, an individual mind, trapped within the network for what might have been centuries, or millennia. As the shuttle moved deeper into the structure, something strange began to happen. The pulsing lights nearest the shuttle grew brighter, steadier, as if reacting to the presence of visitors after a very long, lonely silence. And then, faintly at first, a voice began to form, not through the ship's translator this time, but seemingly directly in the minds of everyone aboard, gentle and layered, as if many voices were speaking together as one. "We feel you," the voice said. "It is different now, quieter. The network's grip. It is not gone, but it is no longer whole." "Can you hear us clearly?" Webb asked aloud, unsure if the strange presence could perceive spoken words at all. "Yes," the voice answered. "We have always heard. We have simply had no way to answer, for a very long time. You have done what none before you could. You have not destroyed us. You have given us back our own voices, even if only in pieces." Ith stepped forward, her small hands trembling. "My people called you the Hollowing," she said softly. "We feared you for longer than any of us could remember. But I do not think you chose this. I do not think any of you ever wanted this." "We did not," the layered voice answered, and for a moment, its tone carried something achingly close to grief. "We built the network to save ourselves from loneliness across the vastness of space. We did not understand what we were building until it was already too late to stop it. For 2,000 years, it has used us, piece by piece, to sustain itself, taking the minds of others to replace what it slowly consumed of our own. We are sorry. We do not know if that is enough, but we are sorry. For every world, for every mind, for everyone the network has ever taken." The bridge of the shuttle fell into a heavy, thoughtful silence. Webb glanced at Ith, whose eyes were filled with tears, but whose expression held something more complicated than simple anger, something closer to a painful, difficult understanding. "What do you need?" Webb asked finally. "Is there a way to free you completely? To end this, for good?" There was a long pause before the voice answered. Perhaps, it said at last. The network's grip has weakened, but it is not broken. If your scientists can study what remains of its structure carefully, without destroying it outright, we believe a way might be found to fully separate each mind still trapped within it, restoring what individual will remains to each of us, however small that might now be after so long. It will take time, it will take patience, but for the first time in 2,000 years, we believe it might be possible. Tanaka stepped forward immediately, her exhaustion forgotten in the sudden flare of scientific hope. I'll need a full team, dedicated resources, and probably years of careful study. But Captain, if there's even a chance we can free these minds properly, I want to try. Webb nodded. You'll have whatever you need. I'll make sure of it. Over the following months, word of the battle at the edge of the galaxy spread across every corner of Concord space, carried by returning ships, by official reports, and eventually, by the survivors themselves, as some of the freed minds within the ancient structure slowly regained enough coherence to speak for themselves. The Concord, shaken by the revelation of what had truly been happening in the Forbidden Zone for 2,000 years, voted to establish a permanent research and rescue mission at the site, dedicated to slowly, carefully freeing every mind still trapped within the shattered remains of the network. Captain Webb and the crew of the USS Earth found themselves, almost overnight, transformed from a small, often overlooked exploration vessel into the most celebrated ship in Concord history. Species who had barely acknowledged humanity's existence 20 years earlier now sought Webb's counsel on matters far beyond the silent reach. The Vethic representative who had spoken up in the Grand Chamber was elected, soon after, to a permanent seat on the Concord Council. The first time in Concord history that one of the smaller, newer species had been given such an honor. A direct result, many said, of the courage they had shown in that pivotal moment. Ith remained aboard the USS Earth for a while longer, though eventually, she chose to join the growing research and rescue effort at the shattered structure, determined to help however she could in freeing the countless minds still trapped within it. Before she left the ship, she found Webb, alone on the observation deck, the same place where he had once stood the night before the great battle, watching the stars. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly, for answering the call, for not turning away, even when everyone told you it would be wiser to. You don't need to thank me, Webb said. It's what we should have done from the start. It's what anyone should do when someone's calling for help. Ith smiled, a small, genuine expression that had grown more common on her face in the months since the battle. Where I come from, there is an old word for people like you. I told your Dr. Tanaka once that it means, roughly, the ones who run toward fire. I think, now, it should also mean something else. The ones who make sure the silence finally ends. Kestra, too, found their assignment changed in the aftermath of the battle. No longer simply an observer sent to watch a young, unpredictable species, they were formally appointed as the Concord's chief liaison to humanity, a position of real trust and respect that would have seemed unthinkable only a year earlier. When Webb asked them, half joking, whether they still thought humans were reckless, Kestra considered the question seriously before answering. I think, they said slowly, that recklessness and courage often look identical from a distance, and it is only afterward, when we see what they accomplish, that we can tell them apart. I have lived 4,000 years, Captain, and I have never seen a single decision change so much, so quickly, as the one you made when you chose not to turn your ship away from a graveyard the entire galaxy had agreed to forget. The USS Earth eventually returned to its regular duties, though nothing about its missions ever felt quite as routine again. Word of what had happened in the Silent Reach spread far beyond Concord space, carried by traders, by diplomats, by curious travelers eager to hear the story firsthand. It became known, in time, simply as the war that started with a single answered call, a reminder, across 100 different worlds and 100 different languages, that sometimes the bravest thing a person, or a whole species could do, was refuse to look away from someone else's suffering, no matter how far away, no matter how forbidden, no matter how old and frightening the silence surrounding it had become. Years later, when new officers joined the crew of the USS Earth, fresh from the Fleet Academy and eager to prove themselves, Captain Webb, older now, his hair grayer still, would often tell them the same simple story on their first night aboard. He would tell them about a small, damaged shuttle drifting in the dark beyond the edge of the galaxy, about an old distress signal from a book of ancient traditions, kept by a grandmother's grandmother, and about a moment when an entire alliance of 100 species had to choose between 2,000 years of careful, quiet fear and a single, uncertain leap toward doing what was right. "We didn't go looking for a war," he would tell them, every time, his voice steady with the memory of that first cold chill on the bridge so many years before. "We went looking for whoever was calling for help. The war found us because we refused to turn back. That's the only lesson worth remembering. Out here in the dark, somebody, somewhere, is always calling for help. The only question that matters is whether anyone answers." And somewhere out at the edge of the galaxy, in a structure once feared and avoided for 2,000 years, countless small, flickering lights continued to grow steadier, brighter, and more whole, with each passing year, one freed mind at a time, proof that even the oldest, coldest silence in the universe could, eventually, be answered. In the first year after the battle, the research and rescue mission at the shattered structure grew from a small team led by Dr. Tanaka into a full Concorde installation, staffed by scientists and healers from a dozen different species, all working together on a problem none of them had ever imagined they would face. How to gently, carefully separate minds that had been tangled together for 2,000 years, without causing more harm in the untangling than the network itself had already caused. Progress was slow. The first successful full separation did not happen until nearly 8 months after the battle, when a single mind, one of the very first the network had ever taken, was finally freed enough to speak clearly, entirely on its own, for the first time, in longer than any living historian could calculate. Tanaka was there when it happened, and she later told Webb that she had cried, not from sadness, but from the simple, overwhelming relief of hearing a voice that had waited so long finally sound like itself again. The freed mind, who eventually chose the name Solvay, something close to a word from their long-lost language meaning returned, became an invaluable guide for the rest of the rescue effort, helping the research team understand the structure's inner workings, far better than sensors and scans alone ever could. Slowly, over the following years, more minds followed, one by one, each freed individual adding their own knowledge, their own memory, their own small piece of a civilization that had once been lost entirely to history, until what had been a nameless, faceless horror haunting the edge of the galaxy began, gradually, to become something else, a community of survivors, rebuilding themselves after the longest, strangest tragedy any species in the Concorde had ever recorded. Not every mind could be saved. Tanaka was honest about that, both in her official reports and in private conversations with Webb. Some had been part of the network for too long, their individual selves worn away entirely by 2,000 years of unwilling service, leaving nothing behind to free. It was a hard truth the rescue team carried with them every day, a reminder that even victory carried a weight of loss that could never be fully undone. But for every mind that could not be saved, dozens more were, and each small success gave the entire mission renewed purpose to continue the slow, careful work. The Threll counselor, who had once warned Webb that he might have doomed them all, visited the research installation 18 months after the battle, arriving with far less ceremony than his earlier confrontations aboard the USS Earth. He spent 2 full days touring the facility, speaking quietly with several of the freed minds, and reviewing the mission's progress in detail. When he finally requested a private conversation with Webb, who had traveled to the installation to check on Tanaka's work, his armored plates carried none of their earlier tension. "I owe you an apology, Captain," the Threll counselor said simply. "I believed caution was wisdom. I believed the silence the Concorde kept was a mercy, sparing us from a fight we could not win. I did not understand that the silence itself was a kind of harm, one we simply chose not to see because it was easier not to look." "You're not the only one who believed that," Webb said. "The whole Concorde did, for 2,000 years. I don't think it makes you a villain, counselor. I think it makes you someone who was finally willing to change your mind when the evidence changed in front of you. That's harder than it sounds, for anyone, of any species." The Threll counselor considered this for a long moment. "There is a saying among my people," he said finally, "that the strongest shell is not the one that never cracks, but the one that learns to open when it must." He extended a heavy, armored hand toward Webb, a Threll gesture of deep respect rarely offered to outsiders. "I am glad, in the end, that your shell was never as strong as ours. Life aboard the USS Earth slowly returned to something resembling its old rhythm, though the ship itself, and its crew, had been permanently changed by what they had seen and done in the Silent Reach. Commander Aisha Okafor was offered command of her own vessel within the year, a new coalition ship built specifically to support the ongoing rescue mission, and she accepted with obvious pride, though she made sure to visit the USS Earth often, unwilling to fully let go of the ship and the crew that had become something like family during the war. Chief Engineer Diego Alvarez became something of a legend among engineering crews across the Concorde, his emergency power redirection techniques from the final battle studied and taught in fleet academies throughout the Alliance. Dr. Ren Tanaka eventually stepped down from her post aboard the USS Earth entirely, choosing instead to lead the research and rescue mission full-time, dedicating herself to the slow, patient work of freeing what remained of an ancient civilization, one careful step at a time. She kept in close contact with the ship and its crew, and on the rare occasions when the USS Earth passed near the installation on other Concorde business, she always made time to show Webb the latest progress, always careful to point out both the victories and the losses with equal honesty. 2 years after the battle, on the anniversary of the day the USS Earth had first answered ITH's distress call, a small ceremony was held aboard the ship, attended by representatives from dozens of species across the coalition that had fought together in the Silent Reach. ITH returned for the occasion, older now in the way her people aged, but stronger, steadier, having found genuine purpose in her work with the rescue mission. Kestra attended as well, now fully settled into their role as Concorde liaison to humanity, their earlier caution long since transformed into something closer to quiet, steady pride. During the ceremony, the Vethic representative, now a respected member of the Concorde Council, rose to speak, her small silver-furred frame no longer trembling the way it had the day she first broke protocol in the Grand Chamber to defend a human captain's decision. 2 years ago, she said, addressing the gathered crowd, a single human ship answered a call for help that an entire alliance of 100 species had agreed, quietly, and for 2,000 years, not to hear. I do not believe that decision was only about courage, though there was courage in it. I believe it was about a simple, stubborn refusal to accept that some silences are meant to be kept. Since that day, we have freed over 300 minds from a captivity, 2,000 years in the making. We have welcomed new voices into our Concorde who had never before been heard, and we have learned, all of us, something that I hope we never forget again, that the edges of our galaxy, the forgotten places, the forbidden zones, are not empty simply because we have chosen not to listen to them. Webb, standing near the back of the gathered crowd with ITH at his side, listened quietly, thinking back to the cold, quiet bridge of the USS Earth on the night the first signal had come through. 3 short pulses, then 3 long ones, then 3 short again, an old, desperate call sent out with almost no hope of ever being heard. You did hear it, though, ITH said quietly beside him, as if reading his thoughts. That is the only part that matters, in the end. Webb smiled, watching the gathered crowd, the strange and wonderful mix of species who had once been strangers, now bound together by a single, shared choice made 2 years earlier in the cold dark beyond the edge of the galaxy. We heard it, he agreed, and we're going to keep listening. Far beyond the ceremony, far beyond the edge of Concorde space, the research installation at the shattered structure continued its slow, patient work through the night, freeing one more mind, and then another, each small light growing steadier and brighter, a quiet, ongoing proof that somewhere in the vast, cold dark of the galaxy, someone was finally, always, listening.